Week 18 of the 2024 NFL season. In the money line, I ended up going 12 and 4. The games I missed were Tennessee over Houston. I thought they would just beat the Texans backups. Chicago over Green Bay. Carolina over Atlanta, and the Jets defeating the Dolphins. That puts me again 12 and 4 in the money line. It put me at 186 and 86 on the year for 272 games. That is 68% winning percentage in the money line. If you guys are wondering how I did last year during the regular season in the money line, I was the same percentage, 68%, but two games better overall as I went 184 and 88 a year ago. In best bets, we hit New England plus 2.5 with Joe Bowden beating out Mitch Trubisky. We missed Tennessee, as I already mentioned. Tampa Bay, they did win against New Orleans, but they did not cover the spread of 13.5. I thought they would take care of New Orleans. Obviously, that game was closer than many of us expected. I did think Denver was going to decimate Kansas City. They covered 9.5. And then I thought Arizona, with obviously Brock Purdy not playing for San Francisco, Arizona playing for Pride, getting to 8 wins, they covered 4.5. So that gave me 3 for 5 on the weekend best bets. That put us on the year at 53 out of 90 in best bets, which is 59%, just below my target line of 60%. Now, last year in best bets, we had a better year. I was 59 for 89 with one push. That was 66%. That was one of the best gambling years of my life. Now, you guys know this year, I got hot towards about the end of the season. The beginning of the season is what really set us back because defensive head coaches were winning over offensive head coaches. Bad teams were covering at historic rates. Underdogs were covering very early in the season. And then, as it typically does, it turned into favorites later in the year. Teams started to separate more from the pack. So with our 14 teams, already set into the postseason, we're not going to go through every single game on the recap as customary here the last couple weeks of the season. Like, honestly, who cares about Indianapolis and Jacksonville? Doug Peterson had just gotten fired this morning as the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. We know the Colts are going to bring back Shane Steichen as their head coach, as well as their general manager, Chris Ballard. So, my thinking here is, we're going to go through some of these games. I'm obviously going to talk about my thoughts on the playoffs. For teams that are out of the playoffs, I'm going to be talking more about the future and what that sort of brings to these organizations. So, without further ado, here we go. We're starting it off. Browns Ravens. This was the Saturday afternoon game. We all knew Baltimore was going to take care of business. I did not feel comfortable betting one of the biggest spreads in the history of the NFL at, about 20 points. At the time of my recording of the podcast on Thursday that aired, I did not know if it was going to be, Bailey Zappi or DTR taking the majority of reps at quarterback for the Browns. Obviously, it was Bailey Zappi for the pick six early. The game was over before then. Let's be honest, though, the game was over before it started. Baltimore wrapped up the number three seed in the AFC. Now, Pittsburgh still had something to play for. If they beat Cincinnati, they would not only knock their arch AFC North rival out of the postseason completely, but they would be the number five seed and they would be going to a Houston team who has really struggled over the last month. Russell Wilson obviously, hit a great pass to Pat Freiermuth on fourth down that the tight end could not come up with. Cincinnati's much maligned defense that just fired defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo yesterday on Black Monday got the stop. Bengals win. They finish the year at 4-8, winning five in a row to get to 9-8. Obviously, the loss against the Patriots week one. You could go to the loss week two against Kansas City, week five against Baltimore, week 10 against Baltimore, even week three against Washington. There's so many games in there. I think obviously the week one against New England, considering what they turned into this year with now the firing of Gerard Mayo, and their opponent is the one most Bengals fans are going to look back on. I think the story for Cincinnati here is going to be how much are they paying Jamar Chase? Can they get T. Higgins back? Joe Burrow has made it clear he wants both those receivers back. And for the record, I'd be very interested to see T. Higgins against the number one corner every single week because I think T. Higgins is very good. I love T. Higgins. I need to see him prove that going up against the number one corner for 17 games this season, that he would be worth number one money over a 4 year contract for me. Because we've seen it from guys who, dominate as a 1A, 1B type receiver, but don't always light the world up against the number one corner, obviously consistently week in and week out. But Lou and Romo, and that Bengals defense just they lack talent, obviously. Jesse Bates went out the door. We know about Sam Hubbard's injury. Um, just the Bengals, they need a lot of work on that defense side of the ball. They're going to have to do it for the draft. I think they did a good job this year shoring out that offensive line for the draft. Now they got Yoki Bosch, even got Jermaine Burton, the receiver out of Alabama in the third round, who did not work out terrific this year. But you got your receiving core, and I think Gesicki, even Drew Sample, Tanner Hudson came in as decently backup tight ends. They had their offense set. Now they have to worry about getting their defense set and getting off, obviously, to faster starts. For Pittsburgh, before the year, I predicted them to be 9-8. They finished 10-7. I thought they would start the year 6-3. They ended up one game better than that at 7-2. The collapse down the stretch was very predictable, especially when you're talking at Philly, at Baltimore, home against the Chiefs, home against the Bengals. We knew those final four games were going to be very tough for a football team who, let's be honest, is very predictable offensively. They get under center, they do a handoff to either Najee Harris or Jalen Warren, sometimes halfback dive, sometimes halfback pitch, and then they'll throw a deep ball down the sideline to George Pickens. That is their entire offense. Arthur Smith is a good offensive coordinator. He's not a great offensive coordinator. And if you watch Hard Knocks with the AFC North, yes, there's a reason why we all love Mike Tomlin. I'm not even sure. I know Baltimore is favored by more than a touchdown in this wild card game. There's a part of me that thinks the Steelers are going to probably cover that spread because they play Lamar Jackson obviously very well. But the bottom line here is their offense is very pedestrian. They have not won a playoff game since 2016, and at any other market but Pittsburgh, fans would be calling for Mike Tomlin's job because this organization obviously is a culture, they have a history, but this cannot be the standard of just having an over 500 season every single year and calling it a success. If you start 10-3, lose five straight to go to 10-8, and get ousted in the wild card round, for most teams outside of the 2023 Philadelphia Eagles, this is a historic collapse from a Steelers offense that, again, they beat up on bad teams earlier in the year. They're really a middle of the pack football team. They're, an above average defense. Middle of the pack offense is not going to get it done in today's 2025 NFL. And then for the Browns, apparently, Deshaun Watson suffered a setback on his Achilles. Honestly, who cares? He should not be back in the building. Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski are both going to be back. I don't love it that Andrew Berry is back. I'm sort of indifferent on Kevin Stefanski. Ken Dorsey was let go as offensive coordinator. I think that means Stefanski is going to be taking play calling duties back. This Browns season was doomed from the start. You watched from the first half, week one against Dallas. You knew it was going to be a long year. Injuries galore on the offensive side of the football, including running back Nick Chubb. We don't know how much he has left in the tank. Plus the offensive line. They traded away Amari Cooper at the trade deadline. And I've been telling, all my Browns fans this that I live with and family here in Cleveland. They're going to have a number two pick in the NFL draft. I think it's time to move on from number 95, Myles Garrett, who, yes, he did become the first one in NFL history with 14 sacks and 4+ seasons, but I think you could replace some of Myles Garrett, at least cheaper, with Mason Graham, who I think is going to be a great defensive end out of Michigan. I think you can get multiple first round picks for number 95. I don't think this team's going anywhere. I think you bring back Jameis Winston for a year, you see how it goes. I don't love the idea of bringing in Kirk Cousins. I think there's a reason why, he looked to Washington, Atlanta, and Atlanta obviously, rightfully, in my opinion, moved to Michael Penix. I thought they should have did it 3 weeks earlier to save their season. Um, this Browns team basically right now is a lost cause of a franchise. So the Eagles, with their third string players, they defeated the Giants, who clearly had no intention of winning this game. Brian Dable and Joe Shane are going to be back for the Giants, who, I do like some of their offensive pieces. Obviously, Malik Neighbors, the star out there, their offensive line led by, Andrew Thomas, pretty good. I like, obviously, their defensive front with Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence. But the biggest focus of this team, they need a quarterback. They finally moved on from Daniel Jones. Whether they get it or not will determine this team's fate for the next decade and Brian Dable's fate above next year. Philadelphia Green Bay will preview it on Thursday. Again, that's a week 1 rematch there that took place in Brazil in the wild card round. Marcus Mariota came in after Jane Daniels played the first half, led the Commanders to a game-winning touchdown drive and the number 6 seed in the NFC. They will now be taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Ironically, the NFC East is the division I got the most right this year. Now, it is my division, but you can't say I'm biased towards it because I said the standings were going to go Philadelphia, Washington, Dallas, New York. And I said Washington was going to overtake Dallas. I said Washington was going to be a playoff team in the NFC. I said, they have a new head coach, they have a new owner, they have a new quarterback. It's a completely new team. It's Houston Texans as from a year ago. And that's exactly what we saw throughout the season. For Dallas, Trey Lance, I got to be honest with you, he played well. Probably got himself a backup job, if not in Dallas, somewhere else in the league next year. And now the future waits on what Dallas will do with Mike McCarthy. You guys know my thoughts on Mike McCarthy. I would love for, as I call him, Coach McSleepy to stay. I think he's a bump on a log. I don't think he's a great coach. I think Danny Parkins over at Fox Sports One said it perfectly when he said, if there is such thing as a bridge coach in the National Football League, his name is Mike McCarthy. New England, obviously, they won the game. Joe Bowden did his best, and Gerard Mayo lost his job. Now, I don't think that's the sole reason why Gerard Mayo lost his job. I think New England has already made up their mind before this game. There was already rumblings in, early November that New England ownership, led by Robert Kraft, was not thrilled with Gerard Mayo in his first year as New England head coach. Listen, I said it all along. I thought Gerard Mayo, it was reported that it was in, Belichick's contract that when he left as the coach of the Patriots, that Gerard Mayo would automatically be the new head coach of the Patriots. Listen, New England just has to admit, in my opinion, right now, that do your job, defensive culture, Bill Belichick, we won 6 Super Bowls, we all get it. Folks, it's over. I don't want Mike Vrabel for this job. All the rumors are he's the leading candidate, and Mike Vrabel will come in, and he's more Belichick than Gerard Mayo, but he's very pro player, and he's going to turn this organization around. Folks, New England does not have very little to any pieces on the side of the ball that matters in 2025 in the National Football League, and that is offense. Hunter Henry, in my opinion, on a great team, is a backup tight end. Antonio Gibson is a decent little third down scat back. That's about all they have. Bob Douglas, okay, decent slot receiver. Butte, probably a 4 or 5 on a high level championship NFL team, yet he's a 1 or a 2 in New England. To me, I mean, if I'm New England, I have the quarterback of the future in Drake May. Now that I don't have the number 1 pick, if they did have the number 1 pick, I would desperately be considering obviously, either trading Drake May and drafting Shedeur Sanders, or trading the pick, or taking somebody to build with Drake May. But now that you have the number 4 pick, I would go out, I would get a young offensive minded coach, whether it is Joe Brady, whether it is Ben Johnson, whether it is Bobby Slowick. The only defensive guy I thought of would be Aaron Glenn because, he's young. I think he'd bring that Dan Campbell aggressiveness with him to New England. But Mike Vrabel, I get it. Everybody loves Vrabel, right? His toughness. He's a culture setter. What he did in Tennessee with Arthur Smith as his offensive coordinator, Ryan Tannehill. They made the AFC Championship. I understand all of it. But for this franchise, they had one head coach for 23 seasons. They've been defense, defense, defense. Even before Belichick, it was Pete Carroll, right? Defensive coach, defensive coach, defensive coach. It's very Pittsburgh esque. And for a team with not a lot of talent on the offense side of the ball outside of the quarterback, listen, defensive coordinators can get the most out of a defensive unit. Look no further than Matt Patricia to Vic Fangio in Philadelphia this past season. I think New England needs to go all in on free agency, get some receivers, get some linemen. Same thing in the draft. Again, they could use probably another defensive lineman here or there, maybe another corner here or there, but their defense is pretty freaking good. And, they need a complete culture reset. They need to go all in on the offense side of the ball. Buffalo will host Denver, obviously, in the wild card round. Jacksonville, Trent Baalke got to keep his job for Indianapolis. GM Chris Ballard, Shane Steichen got to keep their jobs. Doug Peterson is out as the Jaguars head coach. For whatever reason, they started, what was it, 8-3 or 9-3 last year. Trevor Lawrence got hurt. At one point, they were the number one seed in the AFC and very Tennessee Titans esque. Remember 2 years ago, the Titans were the number one seed. They fell off a cliff when Tannehill got hurt. They traded away A.J. Brown. That was it as far as we knew them for the Tennessee Titans franchise. For Jacksonville, we started off 8-3, 9-3. Trevor Lawrence got hurt. They have never recovered. This team, everybody's talking about Mike Vrabel or a culture setter. There's all these talks about leader of men, and then there's an offensive coach. I'm a believer that if you have a young quarterback like a Caleb Williams, like a Drake May, that preferably his first coach is an offensive coach. I think that offensive coaches tend to get the most out of young quarterbacks. Again, in the case of Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, can it work with a defensive coach? Even CJ Stroud, who had a great rookie year. Yes, it can. But you need a Bobby Slowick. You need a Joe Brady or a Brian Dable. You need a Todd Monken or a Greg Roman. You get my gist here? You need a Cliff Kingsbury, either a former head coach, a future head coach, whatever it is, Jared Goff and Ben Johnson, right? You need a superstar offensive coordinator if you're going to have a defensive minded head coach with a young quarterback. And so I think that as Jacksonville now sort of transitions from the Doug Peterson era, this team is such a mess, and Bogey's not a good general manager, and this defensive roster needs a ton of help, more so than the offense side. I mean, the offense side, they have some good pieces to build on. They have Brian Thomas now, who's a great wide receiver, number one, moving forward. This would be the team that I think maybe they go to the defensive side of the ball in Aaron Glenn, for example, to try to get the most on that side of the ball. Have Trevor Lawrence run the football more, conserve the turnovers, and really in a winnable division. Indianapolis, I think the biggest question they have to ask themselves is Anthony Richardson the quarterback of the future? Now to the team with the number one pick, the Tennessee Titans. Listen, Will Levis is not a franchise quarterback. Brian Callahan is, by all accounts, going to stay one more year for Tennessee. Don't know at the time of this recording if that is true or not. I don't know what to think of Callahan. I said before the year they reminded me a lot of the Commanders where they had weapons and no defense and no quarterback, and that's exactly what they are. And so, but with the number one overall pick now, they have a chance to make a franchise altering selection. I do not think they're going to trade the pick. I don't know how Deion Sanders would feel about his son going to Tennessee. You do have Tyler Boyd, you do have Calvin Ridley, you do have Westbrook Akine, Brian Callahan, the head coach, Bill Callahan, the offensive line coach, and you know the offensive line is going to be able to protect Shador Sanders. Excuse me. I think Tennessee needs to move on from Will Levis, so I think it's probably a career backup in this league. Um, in my mind, that's what they should do. For Houston, who has been sputtering over the last month, they have not been the same. Chargers have a very good defense in Jesse Minter. This is going to be a very low scoring wild card game, in my opinion, where it's going to be running the football here. Whichever team can run the football. We've seen the Texans offense have a lot of success this year when Joe Mixon has gotten near that 100-yard threshold and they can stay, on task and ahead of the chains. It's when they get behind the chains that Houston's offense has really struggled. And it's one of the reasons why the Chargers are favorites on the road in that wild card matchup. Okay, Green Bay against Philly. Again, we have to see the health of Jordan Love. You guys know how much of a disappointing year it was for the Bears. Though, ironically, both games against the Packers came down to a game winning field goal. One of them was blocked in Chicago, one of them was not in Green Bay. The Bears, they not only covered the 9.5 points, they won the game outright. Thomas Brown's only win as interim head coach. And there's a lot of talk in Chicago about it's basically down to two candidates. And which one do they prefer? Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator of the Lions, young, hip guy, or Mike Vrabel, culture center. I think again for Caleb Williams, he had a lot of humbling this year, and we've seen rookie quarterbacks, especially number one overall picks, right? They go to a terrible situation. We thought Chicago, who was a 7-win team before this season began, was a better situation than most starting spots for number one overall pick quarterbacks, and their offensive line completely regressed. And he was on his second play caller, and now he's going to be on his third play caller in 2 seasons and his second head coach. So, whichever decision you make here has to be the right one. I would tell you for Chicago, if they do hire Mike Vrabel, it's all going to come down to the offensive coordinator, which is why I think the right move here is to pay Ben Johnson an absolute bag, get him out of Detroit, get the cleverness over to Chicago. He's going to know that Lions roster. He's going to know how to get DJ Moore more involved in the offense. He's going to know how to unlock the running capabilities of DeAndre Swift, or maybe they bring over another running back. He's going to know how to get the best out of Caleb Williams. And I'm going to caution with Ben Johnson, who's a young guy. He's obviously learned from Dan Campbell. Is going to be a complete ultra flip for the Bears. But I think it may also take some time, like it took for Goff, to get into that system and to understand that system. But I think that's the move for the Bears moving forward. New Orleans. I mean, listen, the division. I mean, I like what I've seen out of Bryce Young. He played great against Atlanta yesterday. I don't know if Atlanta has the right head coach at Raheem Morris for the future. I thought the division was going to be relatively easy this year, and Baker Mayfield and Liam Cohen, who I think Liam Cohen, a lot like Dave Canales and maybe Brian Callahan a little bit last year, is going to be the sneaky head coaching candidate. I would not mind him in Chicago. I wouldn't even mind him maybe in New England, anywhere with an offense in mind because of what he did with Baker Mayfield this year. Bucks win the NFC South for the Saints. Listen, they were 5-5 with Derek Carr. They were 0-7 with everybody else. Um, I mentioned it before the year, right? This is an old, expensive, aging roster without a plan. At least in Carolina, you can see Dave Canales and Bryce Young have a plan. Now let's build on it towards the year. Michael Penix, Atlanta. We have a plan. We have our offensive pieces. We have a defensive head coach. Our defense should be better than what it was. That should be Atlanta's focus, in my opinion, next year. Getting the defense side of the ball right. I do think Zach Robinson seems to be a pretty good fit at offensive coordinator for Tampa. Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, when they bring back Godwin for them, hopefully next year, you have Todd Bowles and that defense leading the charge. They're going to be formidable for years to come. For New Orleans, what is their plan? That is the question. Bo Nix only missed two passes yesterday. or excuse me, on Monday, Denver dominated Kansas City. Obviously, the Chargers then they rack up the number 5 seed by defeating the Las Vegas Raiders. For the Raiders, I don't know what they're going to do with Antonio Pierce. The plan for them has to be to get a quarterback. Brock Bowers caught the most passes in the history of the NFL as a rookie. They have Michael Mayer as well as their second tight end. I've always liked Jacoby Myers, so even after trading away Devontae Adams, I like their weapons. They need a quarterback, they need an offensive line, and when you're in a division with Justin Herbert, Jim Harbaugh, Sean Payton, Bo Nix, Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, that is a really tough position to be in. Seattle, they won 10 games this year with Geno Smith, and I hope they feel like that's not good enough because they won 10 games, and yes, they lost that strength of victory tiebreaker to the Rams, and the NFC was so up this year that the 7 seed Packers are an 11-win football team. Um, but for Seattle, you have to feel like with the defensive head coach and Mike McDonald, the defense outside of Leonard Williams sort of unimpressed me this year. They gave him a lot of big plays, especially early in the season, and it just did not feel like to me that Geno Smith is that guy to get you over the top. Now, I don't know what that answer is because they're not going to be in position to take a quarterback. If Jalen Milrow is by chance there, maybe 10, 11, 12. Maybe you move up if you're Seattle and try to get him. I was talking to my cousin who's a big Seahawks fan. Maybe you go get Justin Fields. That's a potential option. I just feel like in order to move up, Seattle has to upgrade from Geno Smith. And then, what can I say about the Lions who just destroyed Minnesota on Sunday night? Sam Darnold, in my opinion, turned back into a pumpkin. What an impressive performance by Aaron Glenn, by Ben Johnson, by Dan Campbell. They talked about it all night on the broadcast. Chris Collinsworth did. The Lions' ability with Anik Robinson to play man coverage on Justin Jefferson with all their injuries in the secondary, to not be afraid. Alec Anzalone back there on linebacker, and they give up 3 field goals to a Vikings offense with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones. This is the biggest fear for the Minnesota Vikings moving forward because everybody's talking about how, oh, they're going to bring Sam Darnold back and they may move on from JJ McCarthy. I've never understood that logic because JJ McCarthy, with a first round option, is essentially free for 5 years. I understand bringing back Darnold for one more year and it becomes, a Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers situation where JJ McCarthy sits one year, you franchise tag Darnold. Darnold is the starter next year, but this is what all Vikings fans feared is, Sam Darnold um turning back into a pumpkin, basically. And if the Rams do exactly what the Lions did to the Vikings offense, it's going to be a long night for Minnesota next Monday night in Los Angeles. Kind of the last wrapping up storyline, too. The Dolphins Jets game, it could have been Aaron Rodgers' last game, threw his 500th career touchdown pass. Tyreek Hill said he wants out of Miami. Why Miami did not have a plan, a backup quarterback plan for Tua Tagovailoa this year, I have no idea. It was one of the biggest mysteries in the NFL this year. And for the Jets and Aaron Rodgers, I think it all comes down to who the head coach and who the general manager is. That is a place where, again, if Mike Vrabel could take the BS that comes out of the Jets, I doubt he'd want that job. But that is a job where they need more of a culture builder than a young offensive mind. That is the clear example of a team that is so down in the dumps with their culture and they have a veteran aging quarterback that you just need a guy that completely resets the room, is a leader of men that gets everybody on the same page. And if Aaron Rodgers does not come back to the Jets next year, I do see a scenario where Aaron just played his final game in the National Football League career, a Hall of Fame career. So on Thursday, we'll break down Chargers, Texans, Steelers, Ravens, uh, Broncos, Bills, Packers, Eagles, Commanders, Bucks, and Vikings Rams. We'll pick all six money line games, and as the rules go with best bets, usually again with best bets, we do only pick five games. I will stick to that formula for the wild card weekend, and I will omit one game. So stay tuned to that on Thursday as the NFL regular season commences. Like that clip from the Brands World podcast? If so, make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there hitting the subscribe button, make sure to also hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. And make sure you check out all the other clips from the Brands World podcast right here on YouTube.